Hello everyone, my name is Jane, and today I'm going to see if I completed all of my 2021 TBRs. So I am a mood reader. It means that I can't really follow TBRs, not matter how much I try, and no matter if I force myself to read a book. If I'm not in the mood for this book when I'm reading it, I won't enjoy it because this is just the way that I work. But although I'm a mood reader, I love doing TBRs. Usually TBRs are more guidelines for me to understand which books I want to read this month, and I do complete some of the books on my TBR, but usually I don't really follow most of my TBR. And because I'm a mood reader, and because I'm doing TBRs every month, I thought it would be really fun for me to react to all of my 2021 TBRs and to see if I actually read those books or not. Now, the thing is that I already filmed this video. In the end of December, I filmed myself reacting to all of my 2021 TBRs, but I had so many problems with that footage. Usually I screen record for my iPad, but that day my iPad didn't work, so also I screen recorded not like I'm used to, so it made a lot of problems. And also reacting to all of my TBRs took so long, like I had a footage of 3 hours, so I gave up on this idea. But in live reading sprints not a long time ago, I talked about it, and it seems like some of you are interested to see me reacting to my TBRs. So although it won't be an actual reaction video, I will go over all of my TBRs, and believe me, it will be much faster like this because reacting to everything will take ages. So I just made a list of all the books that I had on my TBRs. So I will go over all the books that I was planning to read in 2022 and how much of them I actually read. And I'm also going to have some really interesting stats along with did I complete my TBR or not. So it's going to be very fun. And I'm going to include only my monthly TBRs. I had some non-monthly TBRs, like seasonal TBRs, but I didn't have a lot of videos like this. The majority of my TBR videos are my monthly ones, so I'm going to stick with it, so this video won't be really long. And I'm going to count how many books I read for my TBR, how many books I didn't read for my TBR, and how many books I read, but not in the month that I was planning to read it, because I think I'm going to have a lot of books that I read eventually, just not in the month that I was planning to read them, so it's going to be very interesting. And yes, let's start with my first TBR, my January TBR. I started my booktube channel in the beginning of January, so it was my first ever TBR, and I had 6 books on this TBR. The first one was The Invisible Life of Eddie LaRue, and I did read this book, but not in January. I think I read it in February, so I read it eventually, just not in the right time. I also wanted to read The Winter by Marissa Meir, which is the last book in the Lunar Chronicles series. I also read it not in the right time. It took me something like half a year to get to this book. I was also planning to read Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Young. Also, this one I read not in time. I read it, I think, in May. Then I had Girls Open Phone by Melissa Bachelas. This book I didn't read until today. This book is on my TBR. And the 5th book from January TBR is Lovebot Taipei. I also read it not in January, in another month. And finally, the last book of my January TBR is actually one that I read in January. And this is My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oynike and Britway. And I read it. I gave it 1 star. I finished it only because it was fast. But like you can see, out of the 6 books for my January TBR, only one of them I read actually in January. But I still feel like it's pretty good because 4 of them I did read eventually, just not in January. So overall, out of my January TBR, I didn't read only 1 book. Now February. My February TBR was the shortest TBR that I ever made, and this was my TBR for the Valentine's-a-thon. It was the first readathon that I ever hosted. It was so exciting, and I had only 3 books on this TBR. Those books were Dating You, Hating You by Christina Lauren, Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me by Mariko Tamaki, and Artless by Marissa Meir. All 3 of them I read. I also read them in this exact order. I think this is the only TBR that I ever completed fully, but it's a TBR with only 3 books, but it's still 100% success, so I think it's very exciting. My next TBR was my March TBR, and this was for the BTS readathon, another readathon that I hosted in the beginning of 2021 because I love K-pop and I love BTS, and I had 6 books on this TBR. The first one was I Will Be The One by Laila Lee, and I did read this book. It was our peak for the whole readathon. We did a live show for this book, so I had to read it for the live show. Then I had This Violent Delights by Chloe Gong on my TBR. I DNF this book. At the the same month, so I'm going to include it as read in the right time, because for me DNF means that I actually tried to read it, so I am going to count DNFs, it's books that I completed, and I actually DNF'd it in March. Then I had Stardater. This is a book that I was planning to buddy read with Esme. We planned to buddy read it, I feel, something like 2 or 3 times, and it did not work out until today. It's still on my TBR, and I still want to buddy read it with Esme, so hopefully we will actually do it in 2022. Then I had Summer Blonde. This is a book that I picked for a specific prompt, and I didn't read it because I'm not really interested in that book. I just picked it for the prompt and I didn't finish it. Then I had The Memory Book by Lara Every. This is a book that I read in March in time. And lastly, I had Letters to Survivors by Gebe. This is another book that I planned for a specific prompt, and this book was actually interesting. I just couldn't find a copy anywhere. I also couldn't find an ebook for this book in English because it was translated from French or something like this. So overall, I had 6 books on my TBR. 2 of them I didn't complete and 3 of them I did read in time. So it's like 50-50, and it feels logical to me that half of the books I read and half of them I didn't read. And yes, my next TBR was my April TBR. Now, this TBR was technically a seasonal TBR. It was like my spring TBR, but officially it was my April TBR, and I had 9 books on this TBR. First book was Watch Over Me by Nina Lacor. I did read it, not in time. Then I had Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Gracia. I also read it, not in time. And also Burn Our Bodies Down by Rory Power, another book that I had on my TBR, and I read it, just not in April. Then I had One of Us Is Next. This is the sequel for One of Us Is Lying, and this book I actually read in April in time, which is amazing. Then I had Winter by Marissa Mayer, and this isn't the first time that it was on my TBR, like you already know, and I read it just I think in May or June, so I read it not in time. Now I have 3 books that I didn't read from my TBR. Fairest and Stars Above by Marissa Mayer. Those 2 are bonus books from the Lunar Chronicles that I didn't read until today, and also Cinderella is Dead, another book that is still on my TBR. And lastly, my last book was The Gilded Ones by Namina Fona. This is a book that I DNF'd, but also not in April. I DNF'd it in May, so I will count it as read, just not in time. It means that I read only 1 book in time out of my April TBR, but 5 of the books I did read eventually, just not in April, and 3 of the books I didn't read until today. Now May. May was a very interesting month. I had 2 TBRs. The first one was for the Deserathon by Esme from Bookish Buddies, and the second one was for the 72 Fightathon, which was a 1 weekend readathon that I hosted. So those are the books from both of my TBRs. The first one was An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir, which I did read because it was for our Ember in the Ashalong. I read it for a live show, so I did complete it. The second one was Go Serpent Fawn, which you know is still on my TBR. I wanted to read it for the Deserathon because this is a desert vibe book, but I didn't get to it until today. Then I had The Gilded Ones by Namina Fona. I DNF'd it, like you know, but I DNF'd it in May, so I did read it in time. Then I had Girls of Pepper and Fire by Natasha Young. This one I did read in May, so I read it in time. Then I had Carrie by Stephen King. Also read it in time in May. And then I had Uzumaki by John Ito. I didn't read it until today. It's still on my TBR. Then I had Burn Our Bodies Down by Rory Power and Watch Over Me by Nina Lacor. 2 books that I had on my previous TBR, and I did read them in May. So technically I did complete my spring TBR, just not in April, in May. And finally I had Shades, which is a graphic novel that is still on my TBR. It means that out of the 9 books that I was planning to read in May, 6 of them I did complete in time, and only 3 of them I didn't read until today. I feel like 2/3 out of a TBR is a good number for me to complete. Like, I feel accomplished from it. And yes, now with June. I feel like June was the first reading month that was amazing. Like, I feel that June, August, and November were my best reading months of the year. And in June, I participated in the Whatever-a-thon, which was one of my favorite readathons that I ever participated in. I had a long TBR, and I did complete the 3 first books out of my TBR: Red, White, and Royal Blue by Cassie McQuiston, Bloom by Kevin Panetta, and Spinning by Tilly Walden. The 3 of them I read in time in June. Then I had Lost in the Neverwoods. This is another book that I DNF'd, but I didn't DNF it in June, so I read it, just not in time. Then I had The Ones We Were Meant to Find by John He. It's still on my TBR until today. I had also A Torch Against the Night by Saba Tahir, the second book of the Ember in the Ashes series, and I did read it in time because we had a live show. Also, Stardater was on my TBR, and you know already that I didn't read it until today. Also had Thunderhead by Neil Schusterman, the second book of Scythe, on my TBR. This one I did complete, but I also had The Tool at the same TBR TBR. The two I read in another month, so I did read eventually. And lastly, I had Where the Crawdads Sing, which I didn't read until today. It's still on my TBR. So 5 books out of my TBR I actually did complete, and 2 of them I did read eventually, just not in June. So only 3 of them I didn't complete. So this is another month that I read more than half of the books on my TBR. I feel like it's nice, like I didn't expect as a mood reader to so far read mostly over half of my TBR, so I feel like it's really good. Now we are getting to my July TBR, and this was my first TBR with my TBR game, the TBR of Colors, and from July my TBRs really started to get longer and more chaotic. Like I had so many things on my TBRs because of my TBR game and because of readathons, so I feel like now I will have a ton of books that I didn't read for my TBR. Now in July I didn't have a ton. I had 7 books on my TBR, which is still good. The first one was Sheets that I didn't read, you already know it. I had also The Tool by Neil Shusterman, which I read, just not in July. Ferris by Marissa Mayer, a book that I still didn't read until today. I had also Misery by Stephen King. This book I DNF'd, just not in July, so I did read it, just not in time. Then I had You Must Not Miss by Katrina Leno. I did read this book last month in January, but I'm going to count it as didn't read because I read it not in 2021. So because of it, I'm going to act like I didn't read it until today because I didn't read it until the end of 2021. I also had The Traveling Cat Chronicles on my TBR. I didn't read it until today. It's still on my TBR. And finally, the one book that I actually read from July was A Reaper at the Gates by Saba Tahir, the 4th book in the Ember in the Ashes series. Again, I read it for a live show, so I actually completed it. But like you can see, I completed only 1 book out of my July TBR. 2 books I did read eventually, but like the majority of my TBR I didn't read. So this is a TBR that I didn't succeed. Then we have August. August was the month that I read my most favorite book of 2021, and in general a really good reading month. But this was the most chaotic TBR ever. I was also participating in the Tropical Readathon, but also I was participating in the Olympics-a-thon. The Olympics-a-thon was in the end of July and in the beginning of August, so I won't count this TBR because it will be really hard for me because it was in 2 months. So I'm going to count only my Tropical Readathon TBR, and only my Tropical Readathon TBR and my TBR game had already 17 books. So obviously I didn't complete this TBR, but I didn't do as bad as I thought that I will. The first 2 books, The Maidens and Opposite of Always, I didn't read until today. Both of them are on my TBR. Then I had Mexican Gothic, and I did read it eventually, just not in August. Then I had Illumine by J. Christoph and Emmy Kaufman, and this one is still on my TBR. It was on so many TBRs until today. Then I had The Sky Beyond the Storm by Saba Tahir. This is the last book of the Ember in the Ashes series, and I did read it in time because of the live show. Thank you, Ember in the Ashalong. You're the only reason that I completed my TBRs. And then I had The Guest List by Lucy Foley, another book that I read in time, so good for me. Then I had The Taking of Jake Livingstone, another book that I have until today on my TBR. Then I had XOXO by XEO, and I did read it in time. I was so excited about it. Then I had 2 books that I didn't read, Felix Ever After and Black Girl Unlimited. Both of them I didn't read until today. They are on my audiobook TBR, but I'm not sure that I will ever get to them because my audiobook TBR is so long. Then I had Tweet Cute by Emma Lord. I did read it in August. Also, The Only Good Indians. This is a book that is on my audiobook TBR, but I still want to read until today, but I didn't read it yet. I had also Arsenic and Adobe and Ace of Spades. Both of them are books that I read, but not in August, so I read eventually. They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvere and Go Serpent Phone by Melissa Bachelas are 2 books that I didn't read until today. Both of them are on my TBR. And the last book was Nevermore by Jessica Townsend, and this is a book that I actually read in August, so this is a book that I completed. Like you can see, my August TBR was chaotic. 9 books I didn't read, which is crazy, but 5 of them I did read and 3 of them I read eventually, so it's like 9 and 8. So I read almost half of my TBR, but this TBR was so long, like it wasn't achievable in any way, so I'm still really proud of myself. Then I had my September TBR. I participated in the Bookaholic, and I had 9 books on my TBR, and I wasn't good at completing my TBR. The first one was Ace of Spades, which I actually read in September, so I actually completed it in time. I also read Fangs in time, also in September, and I had Lost in the Neverwoods by Aidan Thomas, and this book I DNF'd, but in September, so I did complete it in time. And then I had To Kill a Kingdom, The Bright Test, Out, Days of Blood and Starlight, Nevermore 2, and Shiver. 6 books that I was planning to read and I didn't read. All 6 of them are still on my TBR, so this is pretty bad. I'm a mood reader, so forgive me. Then October, another pretty chaotic month because I participated in 3 readathons, and the books that I was planning to read is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia and The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. Both of them I read in October, so that's amazing. Then I was planning to read Out and Illumine. Both of them I didn't read until today. They are on my TBR. Then I had The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware, and This Witch Has Done Born by Isabel Sterling, and Arsenic and Dove, and also Misery by Stephen King. All 4 of them I read in October. Technically I DNF'd Misery. As of DNF I will try to read it somewhere in the future, but I did read all of them. And then I had Night House by Lee Bardugo, Good Gore, Bad Blood by Holly Jackson, Magic Fish, and Orange. 4 of those books I didn't read until today. 4 of them are on my TBR. So like 6 books I read, 6 books I didn't read, 50-50 again. But I still feel like it's very good because in October I was in a reading slump and I read overall only 7 books in October, but it's still really amazing. And then we have November. So basically November was again one of the best reading months that I ever had in 2021. November was the month of the Pokemon-thon, which is the readathon that I created, and I love this readathon so much. It was so fun and such a great time. The thing is that I had a huge TBR for the readathon because I tried to complete all the poems. I actually completed all of the poems, but this was the most mood reader month that I had last year. I was mood reading so much. Literally all of the books that I read that month weren't on my TBR except 2. The 2 that were on my TBR was The Wolf and the Woodsman by Eva Reid. I read it for the Enchanted book club, so I needed to finish it for a live show. And I read also The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin. I DNF'd The Obelisk Gate, but I DNF'd it in November, so I count it as read. And then I had a ton of books that I didn't read. Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren, Luck of the Titanic by Stacey Lin, Days of Blood and Starlight by Laini Taylor, Go Surf and Turn by Melissa Bashadas, In Real Life by Jen Wong, Then Night Swim, Summer of Salt by Katrina Leonard, The Ones We Were Meant to Find by John He, To Kill a Kingdom, A House in the Cerulean Sea, and Girls of Storm and Shadow by Natasha Nyang. So I literally had 11 books on my TBR that I didn't complete. Like 14 books for a TBR is already a lot of books for a TBR, but I read only 2 of them. So literally 11 of them I didn't complete. This is definitely the month that I didn't complete my TBR the most. But again, I was only mood reading that month. So yes, this was pretty funny. And yes, now we got to December, the last month of 2021. I also participated in 2 or 3 readathons. One of them was the Falalalathon, which I also co-hosted. I had 9 books on my TBR that month. The first one was Midnight in Everwood, and I did read it because it was for the Enchanted book club. I read it for a live show. Then I had The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. I DNF'd The Obelisk Gate, so obviously it's also a DNF for The Stone Sky because I DNF'd the second book in the series, so obviously it's also a DNF for the 4th one. So I'm going to count it as read in time. Duke Actually and In Real Life, both of those books I didn't read. Both of them until today are on my TBR. Then I had Window Shopping by Tessa Bailey. Obviously I read it. I was so excited about this book. And then I had One Day in December by Josie Silver, Undercover Romance, and The By Taste by Helen Hong. The 3 of them I didn't read until today, and they are still on my TBR. I really want to read them. And finally I had In Holidays by Christina Lauren. I did read it in time. So in December I had 9 books. 4 of them I read, 5 of them I didn't read, but it's still close to a half, so I'm still pretty happy from the results. Now we got to the actual stats. So overall, out of all of my TBRs, 40 books I did read in time. 16 books I read eventually, just not in the month that I was planning to read it, so not in the month of the actual TBR. And lastly, I did not read 54 books out of my TBR, which is so much. Now, if you take the books that I read and the books that I read eventually, I do have 56 books that I read out of my TBR. So if you compare it, technically I succeeded, and most of the books out of my TBRs I did read eventually. But if you don't count the books that I did read eventually, and you count only the books that I read in time, obviously 40 against 54, the 54 wins. But it's still so interesting. I feel like the majority of my TBRs I did read half of them or more, which is really good. And I feel like I had some specific months, like August, which I had 17 books on my TBR, which is crazy. And November, which I only mood read and literally didn't finish 11 of the books on my TBR. So I feel like those 2 months really set this number higher. And without those 2 months, maybe I would even succeed in completing most of my TBRs. But yes, I feel like usually 50-50 is a really logical thing for me. Like I thought that I'm reading 1 or 2 books out of my TBR, but apparently it's a lot more, which is amazing. Now I have more stats which are so interesting because I saw so many books that were on multiple TBRs and I counted all of them because I was sure that I have a lot of books that were on 3, 4, 5 TBRs, but apparently all of the books that had multiple times on my TBR were max 2. It means that all of the books that were more than 1 time on a TBR were only 2 and not more, which was really surprising to me. The only book out of my 2021 TBRs that was more than twice on a TBR was Gore Serpent Thorn by Melissa Bashadas. This is so funny because this book was 4 times on a TBR, like literally 4 times, which is a lot if you compare to the other books that none of them were more than 2 times on a TBR. And I keep putting it on TBRs because it's usually really fitting for prompts I need. But the fact that I had this book 4 times on my TBR and until today I didn't get to it just makes me realize that maybe I'm not really interested about this book and maybe I'm just putting it on my TBRs because it goes well with the prompts and not because I actually want to read it. So I feel like this is the actual reason that I didn't read it until today. So it makes me think about maybe DNF in it, but I'm happy that I realized it. And finally, the final stats that I really wanted to check is how many books were actually on my TBRs and how many books I actually read in the end of each month. Like, do I put too many books on my TBR? Do I put too little books on my TBR? Like you can see, I made a table of all the books that I read and how many books I was planning to read each month. Now in total, I had 110 books on my TBRs throughout 2021, which is so much. I do want to remind that some of them were repeating each other, so it's 110, also counting all the repeats, but eventually I read 148 books in 2021, which is amazing. So I did read 28 books more than I was planning in TBRs, but if I'm actually looking at the month and how much I read, like you can see, until July, most of my TBRs weren't really long, but at the second half of the year, I had a really long TBRs, especially August and November and October. Like all of them were too much. I think that I don't want to make a TBR over 10 books ever. Like this whole stats made me realize that, but like you can see, all of the months, almost all of them, I read or the exact amount of books that I was planning to read or more. In November and December, I read 1 book less than I was planning, but that's still really close to the actual number that I was planning. The only 2 months that I read less books that I was planning to read was in October and in April. And that's because also in April and also in October, those were the 2 months that I had a reading slump in. So those 2 months, I didn't read as much as I'm used to. But all the other months, I read all the exact number or more, which is really, really amazing and really exciting. And yes, in summary, I'm a mood reader. You can see that I'm a mood reader. Obviously, I don't follow most of my TBRs. And yes, it was fun to look back at 2021 and to realize better things about my reading and how I read compared to my TBRs. And I feel like I learned a lot about my reading from this video. I know that in the end, I didn't react to all of the videos, but I do think it's much more easier and faster that I made it a list like today. And I just went over all the list pretty quickly because otherwise I would have a 3-hour long footage like I had last time. So I really hope that you still really enjoyed this video, although I wasn't reacting to stuff. I also feel like most of my TBRs include mostly only physical books that I have on my physical TBR, but every month I don't read only physical books. I read a lot of audiobooks and a lot of ebooks, so it's logical that I also didn't get to most of my TBRs because I don't read only physical books, and it makes me think that maybe I should put a lot more audiobooks and ebooks on my TBR and not only physical books, which is funny because I only finished filming my March TBR and I think that all of the books except one are on my physical TBR, but I will remember it for future months. And yes, I really hope that you enjoyed and I will see you in the next video. Bye everyone!